Time to elevate. You're running on empty with Matt and Tony.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Running on Empty. I'm Matt.
And I'm Tony.
And we're running on empty. And today we have got a repeat repeat interview. It's our What the Heck Day on Running on Empty. And we welcome back to the show, Jay Heck. How are you?
Hey, I'm fine. And it's good that you're running on empty because there's so much stuff going on here in Wisconsin. I need to unload it and fill up your
That's great. And it is appropriate we call this What the Heck is Going On with Jay Heck, because there is, I got to tell you, Jay, I've been in Wisconsin now for 33 years.
Me too.
Yeah, you too. And I don't want to sound nostalgic, but I don't really recognize our state anymore. I really don't. And a huge part of that is the politics of this state, which now for our listeners who may not know, Jay is the executive director of Common Cause Wisconsin, which is, I would say America's premier clean government organization. And Jay, you've stood for that for many years. Wisconsin, before we get into some of the specifics of the madness going on in Wisconsin, Wisconsin used to be known as the cleanest of clean government states. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. When I moved here to Madison from Washington, D.C. in 1988, Wisconsin had the reputation of being the good government state, the cleanest politics, the least corrupt, and actually a state where bipartisan cooperation was prized, where Republicans and Democrats actually got along and worked together to improve the lives of the citizens of the state. So we had the best quality public education in the state, the best public universities in the state, the best environmental protection. We had so many great things in this state. And in the last 33 years, and I don't know if it's coincidence with you and me having moved here, Tony, but it's gone steadily downhill since about 1990, unfortunately. And
that's when big money came into our political system.
It did. That's right.
And that had a real, as your organization and many others would say, that does have a corrupting effect.
Sure.
And we've seen that. And we've seen that the corruption is legalized.
Yeah.
Essentially legalized bribery. And now since the presidential election of 2020, the Republican Party has been all over the nation trying to either reverse or discredit the results. Let's talk about in our state, for people who may not know, the Speaker of the Assembly, Robin Vos, Republican, appointed a former Supreme Court Justice, Michael Gableman, to do a quote unquote investigation of the election of 2020. So what is that all about, Jay?
Well, first of all, Wisconsin is always very close in presidential elections. And 2020, Joe Biden won the state by a little over 20,000 votes. Now, that wasn't even the closest presidential election in the last 20 years.
Right.
2004 and 2000 were both closer. 5,000 votes in 2000, 12,000 in 2004. And 2016 was very close, about 23,000. So we're used to close votes. But what happened, of course, was that Donald Trump decided that he was not going to concede. And so in 3 or 4 states, Wisconsin being one of them, he wanted to see the results overturned. And right after the election, former Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice Michael Gableman, who served 10 years, arguably the worst justice in the history of Wisconsin, the most corrupt, the least impartial, and the nastiest, and who would not have won re-election in 2018 had he run again. He said that he believed that Wisconsin was stolen for Biden. And this is the guy that the Speaker of the Assembly, Robin Vos, chose to launch a quote unquote investigation. But the only reason Vos even did that was because he, over the summer, was called down to Alabama to meet with Donald Trump on an airplane And Trump read him the riot act. He said, I want you
Right.
to overturn the election. So Voss came back to Wisconsin, and he brought this guy out of mothballs, Michael Gableman, and said, okay, you're the guy. We're going to give you $700,000 taxpayer money, and you have an open-ended invitation to fish for whatever it is you need to find. And so what Gableman has done is he's hired all out-of-state conspiracy theorists, everybody from Mike Lindell, the pillow guy.
Oh, the pillow guy, right.
Oh, great.
Who believes the election was won because of Chinese hacking. But he's also brought in other people, like a guy from Massachusetts who said that there was a mathematical switch on that created different vote totals in different states. He really hired nobody from Wisconsin. He's hired all these out-of-state nutcases who know nothing about Wisconsin law, by the way. And Gableman himself knows nothing about election law. He admitted that. And yet this is the guy that the Republicans are putting stock in to find out the fraud. Fraud.
I watched Gableman testified before an Assembly Elections Committee the other day. Jay, you know this. And in part of the testimony, he held up a book written by David Plouffe, who was Barack Obama's former political coordinator. And the book was called A Citizen's Guide to Defeating Donald Trump in 2020. Gableman has now constructed a new conspiracy that it was David Plouffe and Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook who together conspired to throw the 5 biggest Democratic cities in Wisconsin to Joe Biden. Where do they get this stuff from, Jay?
Yeah, this is one of the great lies of 2020 in Wisconsin. and what they're talking about was, keep in mind, then as now, Wisconsin was under a medical emergency, as many states were, under COVID. And what happened in Wisconsin was that city governments, city elections, county elections all over the state were suffering from a lack of resources to be able to buy plastic dividers at polling places to keep people safe, to buy hand sanitizer. They also lost all their elderly people who usually act as poll workers. Right. And so what happened is that Mark Zuckerberg and his wife, Priscilla Chan, put up money, not just in Wisconsin, but all over the country, for the purposes of helping to mitigate the COVID crisis to help run elections. And it wasn't targeted at Democrats. It was for anybody who applied for it. And so it is true that the 5 largest cities in Wisconsin, which happen to have Democratic pluralities, applied, but so did 200 other municipalities in Wisconsin and received money. By the way, any municipality, Republican or Democrat, that applied got the money. And it was to do things like hire poll workers, provide protection, provide masks so that people could vote safely. That infuriated the Republicans because why? Because it meant that more people were able to vote safely, and that increased voter turnout, and it made them crazy. And that's why they're going after the 5 cities in Wisconsin, why they're going after the Zuckerberg, quote unquote, money. By the way, what's always ironic to me is they say out-of-state money shouldn't be used for elections. Oh, but it's okay for out-of-state corporate money to be used to run ads attacking candidates.
Right.
That's fine.
But fine.
If you use out-of-state money to provide protection against COVID, that's somehow a corrupting influence of money. It's just
so Jay, is the end game of this, because everyone knows that the election's not going to be overturned. I think even Gableman knows that, right? He keeps saying, I don't want to overturn the election. But is the end game that they will turn control of elections over to the Republican Party? Is that the end game?
Yeah, it's twofold. It's number one, that they will be able to use all these conspiracy theorists, everything but from disabled people illegally casting votes in nursing homes. Again, a total fraud. And we should talk about the ridiculous and awful allegations made by the Racine County Sheriff.
We'll get into that. But the end game is to make it more difficult, if they can, for people to vote, but to raise the specter of fraud
to cast doubt, not just on 2020, but to take that to fire up the base for 2022, elect a Republican governor in Wisconsin and in other states. And then ultimately, Tony and Matt, you know what this is all about. It's to make way and set the path for Donald Trump to return triumphantly
Yeah.
in 2024, or Trump's daughter, Ivanka, or whoever he chooses to carry out the regime.
Yeah.
So
Because
that's-
usually, Jay, the Republicans have no interest in the Secretary of State office, correct? I mean, Doug LaFollette, I love him. Doug has been there forever. Nobody really knows what he does.
nothing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But now all of a sudden, in this next election cycle, the Republicans have an intense interest in the Secretary of State office. And so there is I guess, a theory out there that maybe they would plan to put control of the elections in that office. Is that a feasible scenario?
Sure. Here's the irony. The Republicans have, after, you'll remember the caucus scandal, we talked about that. Republicans and Democrats together set up the Government Accountability Board to replace the old state elections board to run elections in Wisconsin. The problem for Republicans was that was too independent, and that the judges, they abided by the law and they read
did their
the law.
job.
They didn't do what the Republicans wanted. And so Scott Walker and the Republicans in 2015 destroyed the Government Accountability Board and replaced it with the partisan Wisconsin Elections Commission.
Right.
Now, that was set up only with Republican votes, or Democrats.
Right.
Voted for that. That's not sufficiently compliant with what they want.
Yeah.
And so the thing now is to use the Secretary of State, an office, by the way, which has not had any involvement in elections for 40 years, and make that the office that will run elections, have a Republican partisan run elections so that they can control it. So this is the third swing at the pinata for the Republicans to try to gain control of elections in Wisconsin.
Well, and I'm sure you would agree with me, Jay, that Megan Wolf, who's the administrator of the WEC, is probably one of the most competent state administrators, and now they're calling on her to resign.
Here's the irony of that. She replaced a guy named Mike Haas.
Right.
Republicans said was a partisan patsy because he had once run for the state assembly many, many years ago on the Democratic side. They replaced, with Republican votes only, Megan Wolf to become the administrator. Yeah. But the fact is that she has said that elections have to be run in a nonpartisan way, and it just makes Robin Vos, all of them, crazy. Yeah. So they want someone that will jump when they say jump, who will ask only, how high do you want me to jump? Yeah. Not whether or not it's illegal for me to jump.
And that's a good transition, Jay, to what happened in Racine. So the Wisconsin Election Commission had a series of public votes about how they were going to handle absentee ballots in nursing homes. And now the Racine County Sheriff, Christopher Schmalling, I guess is his name, is saying that the Wisconsin Election Commission, 5 out of the 6, committed a crime by allowing the absentee ballots to be sent to the nursing home. What is this all about?
Christopher Schmalling is the elected partisan sheriff of Racine County. He's a Republican, a big Trump supporter.
Yep.
And so he had a guy on his staff who was named Sergeant Llewell, who has now since been promoted to lieutenant for his great work. Lieutenant Llewell decided that what they needed to do was investigate the possibility that somebody in a Racine nursing home was having their ballot marked by a worker there, but not with a family member present, and that assistance constituted voter fraud. That a couple of those ballots were marked by people who may not have been completely, had their faculties completely intact, and that somehow those votes, although they can't prove it, must have been cast for Biden and not for Trump. So based on that, what this lieutenant did was he brought in a couple of people to make some allegations, no substantiation. And here's the thing about it. It's totally legal for people in nursing homes to be able to have assistance from workers there. And it's what is illegal is to prevent them from being able to vote with assistance. So
Exactly.
it's actually the opposite of what the sheriff and his lieutenant were trying to do. And here's the most galling thing at all. The Racine County District Attorney is not touching this thing. They were unable to get the district attorney of their own county in Racine to listen to them and press charges. So that's why he charged the Elections Commission with fraud, because he cannot even get the district attorney to take these charges seriously. This is again, and by the way, Gableman said, oh, absolutely, this is something that we have to investigate. And Robin Voss has called for, again, the firing of Megan Wolf over this. So it's a total sham. It's a total misuse of taxpayer dollars.
So before you said that Trump read Voss the Riot Act. What has he got on him?
The problem stemmed from the fact that a Republican legislator in Wisconsin by the name of Janelle Brandon, who is the chair of the Assembly Campaign and Elections Committee, is a big Trump supporter. And she wanted to launch investigations on her own of the 2020 election. And Robin Voss didn't want some legislator that he didn't have control of running off and launching investigations. And so she was not authorized to issue subpoenas. Only the Speaker of the Assembly can sign off on the issuing of subpoenas. By the way, the legislature doesn't subpoena people and bring them in to testify. That hasn't been done in 35, 40 years in Wisconsin. So what happened when Trump heard this was he called Voss down to Alabama and said, you had better investigate this election. Otherwise, I'm going to come up to Wisconsin. I'm going to run against you in the primary, and I'm going to replace all the Republican leadership with Trump supporters. That's basically what happened.
Oh, my goodness.
So the Republican Party in this state has been totally taken over by the conspiracy theorists and the Trump wing of the party.
Do they not realize that if you get rid of him and or the members of his family, that this doesn't become really an issue anymore? I mean, like, so here's a question. So I know there's a lot of January 6th stuff going on, and it looks incredibly damning for a lot of the stuff that Trump did. Will that have any impact as to what happens in the future?
Well, not with his base, because, there's a certain segment of the American electorate, as you know, and not just Wisconsin, but all over the country. I mean, Trump could, Trump, as he said, he could go in the middle of Fifth Avenue and, shoot people in the face, and they will still vote for him. So, I mean, there is that element, and there's a large element of that in Wisconsin. And it's in part because of the information that they seek out and the information that they believe in. You all know this, you're in communications, so you understand how all this works. But I do think that if this continues to go on in Wisconsin, that ultimately it's going to wear thin with people when they're not getting any results from the Wisconsin legislature to have their needs met and to have the things they really care about addressed. If everything is going, all the energy is going, to overturn elections or get control of the political situation rather than address problems, ultimately that's gonna backfire on Republicans, I think.
Well, that's a good transition, Jay, to the issue of redistricting. In 2010, for our audience who may not know, the legislative districts, congressional districts also get redistricted every 10 years after the census. And back in 2010, Jay, the Republicans, didn't they move around over 2 million Wisconsin citizens into different districts?
Well, it's important to just correct you a bit. 2010 was the election.
Right.
In 2010, Republicans gained control of the Wisconsin legislature and a majority of the congressional seats because the state was not gerrymandered. Because at the 2010 election, they were operating under the redistricting process of 2001. And it was only because the state wasn't gerrymandered and has never been gerrymandered prior to 2011 that Republicans were even able to gain control of the legislature.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was in 2011 that they instituted the most partisan, most extreme gerrymander of any state in the country in 2011, and one of the 5 most partisan gerrymanders in the country in the last 50 years.
Right. They ended up moving, more than a third of the state's
2.4
voters.
2.4 million people.
So in 2011, the Republicans moved 2.4 million Wisconsin voters into new districts. And now in 2021,
Or don't
they're
move it.
saying we can't move voters into districts because that would be too confusing or disruptive.
Yes. I mean, it's just such obvious hypocrisy. I mean, not even a 9-year-old. I get a 9-year-old, of course, would get it. I mean, a 2-year-old would understand the illogic that they're using about this. I mean, that's the problem. And absolutely, what Republicans have said is that we want to keep in place the maps that we drew in 2011 because we don't want to confuse people. So we want to do what's called least change. We want to make sure that the districts basically that were drawn in 2011 are adjusted a little bit for population, but we keep everything the same. And of course, what that would mean is another 10 years of Republican.
Jay, under the current maps, out of the 99 assembly districts, how many of those 99 are truly competitive?
Well, to give you an idea, in 2010, before gerrymandering, probably about 33 to 35 were arguably competitive. Now, less than 10.
Less than 10.
And what I'm talking about are within 10 points. So you've run or people that have run for office. A 55 to 45% election is a blowout. But for the purposes of talking about a competitive election, there were only 9 of 99 assembly districts fell outside of that 10 point or fell inside of that 10 point margin. Everything else was blown out. And that was accomplished by packing Democrats into many fewer districts, spreading Republicans out over more districts, but making sure that they had an advantage, and then instituting voter suppression and blowing the cap on secret money.
Right.
You have the other advantages that they have.
So the other day, Jay, the Wisconsin Supreme Court, the conservative majority by a 4-3 vote, said essentially that these Republican gerrymandered maps are fine. So is there, being that our state Supreme Court said that now, and we know the governor has his own maps, right? The People's Commission maps, which have some controversy also, but is there any recourse at this point? Once the state Supreme Court did what they did, what happens next?
Well, first of all, it's important to point out that the state Supreme Court has not been involved in redistricting ever before. Last time there was even remote involvement was in the 1960s.
Wow.
Always been federal courts that have come in and drawn this, and the federal courts were prepared to take this up. But the conservatives and the Republicans badly wanted it to go to the state Supreme Court because they enjoy a 4-3 conservative majority on that court. And they got the ruling that they wanted, which was that the Republicans said that we are going to look at least change maps, i.e. the Republican maps. And this was just an awful misreading of the United States Supreme Court decision. And they said that we're not going to consider partisanship when we look at the maps.
Okay.
What the United States Supreme Court said 2 years ago, this is John Roberts and the conservatives on the court, they said, well, the federal courts shouldn't be looking at partisanship. That is a serious matter, but that is something that state courts need to adjudicate and rule. And Rebecca Bradley, the dim-witted conservative on the Wisconsin Supreme Court who wrote the opinion, said, oh, no, it's not the job of the court to look at unfair partisanship. That's a political matter that the legislature should solve, which is a total misreading of what the U.S. Supreme Court said 2 years ago. And so the bottom line is that right now it is in the state Supreme Court. There will be oral arguments in January. The federal courts could become involved possibly.
Okay.
There will certainly be lawsuits with regard to infringement of voting rights and the way that they constructed minority districts in the Milwaukee area, Latino and African American districts. But to be honest with you, the state Supreme Court is really in the driver's seat right now. And so what we're hoping and what we're looking at is that Justice Hagedorn, who is sort of a conservative, a small c conservative who doesn't always follow the
Right.
the right-wing line, will have an epiphany and come to his senses and understand that this is something that he needs to stand up against.
Well, does it hurt, Jay, that the Democrats are divided? Because the governor did come up with his own maps through his People's Commission, and I believe that 17 of the Democrats ended up in the assembly ended up voting against the governor's maps because they claim it dilutes the majority minority districts, right? So to me, it sounded like a lot of the Milwaukee area representatives were, basically fretting the idea that they might have to face competition in their districts, right?
Well, there's a lot of blame to go around there.
Yeah.
One of the problems was that the People's Maps Commission, I don't think, vetted their maps very well with attorneys with regard to compliance with the Voting Rights Act.
Okay.
So what they did do was that they did reduce the number of districts that had majority representation. And of course, that was extremely upsetting to the African American and Latino members of the delegation. They could have drawn the maps in a way that would have avoided doing that, I think. And unfortunately, they didn't. What they did instead, which I think was the wrong thing, was they said, well, what we'll do is we'll expand the Democratic packed majorities out a bit so that we'll have more opportunity to win seats
Right.
on Milwaukee. So in other words, they were actually trying to gerrymander a bit to try to make it a little better for themselves. And I think that was a mistake. I don't think good government groups or progressives ought to be engaged in trying to gerrymander for Democrats.
Which is why you support the Iowa model, right? So what would
Exactly.
the Iowa model do?
Not partisan criteria. In other words, you don't look at past election results to try to get a preordained result for the next
Right.
election. Instead, what you do is you look at the map and you say, well, what is the map? What should the map look like in terms of keeping communities together, cities together, counties together if you can? Shape, squares are good, rectangles are really good. What you want to avoid is what Wisconsin and particularly Illinois, what the Democrats did in Illinois this time around is even more horrendous than they've done ever before. And that is to make these districts that have, the squiggly lines that snake all around and, grab this block here and that block there. In Iowa, that's all done by a nonpartisan agency. It's all done with criteria. Legislators cannot interfere with the drawing of the maps, and they cannot amend the maps. They can vote up or down on them. They cannot amend them. And in Iowa, they have passed now 5 times, 50 years. Republicans control the Iowa legislature and the governorship.
Yeah.
They agree to the nonpartisan maps because they knew that that's what the people of Iowa demanded.
So none of the districts look like salamanders. That's where the term comes from, right? A Representative Eldridge Jerry in Massachusetts.
Absolutely.
He had the district look like a salamander, right? So it was
Correct.
Jerry and salamander, gerrymander.
You don't look that old. That was over.
No, I read that in a book.
There you go.
Yeah. But Jay, this looks like an uphill battle, doesn't it? I mean, what would it take to get the Iowa model in the state?
Well, here's what as you might imagine, because I am in the business of political reform, I'm an eternal optimist. And so I'd have to be, because if I didn't, I'm sure I would have slipped my wrist years ago.
Well, you've been a Cleveland baseball fan all these years. You have to be an optimist, right?
Yeah, and now we're the Guardians, not the Indians. But here you go. What I think this points out to, this latest gerrymander by the Republicans in Wisconsin and the Supreme Court decision, I think actually it'll fuel the move for a nonpartisan system like Iowa. Because when all the activists that have been working so hard to try to avoid this gerrymander in 2011 now see what's on the horizon, which is a Republican gerrymander, where are they going to channel that anger and that energy? I mean, they could just, I don't know, they could go out and beat the cat in the backyard, or they could channel it into a movement of politics and action to bring about change in Wisconsin. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to have the same kind of demonstrations on the Capitol that you saw in 2010 for Act 10, thousands of Wisconsinites demanding fair maps, demanding fair representation. I think it's the kind of thing that is only getting stronger. It's a lot stronger now than it was 10 years ago. And I will predict to you, when none of the three of us will be discussing this, because we'll all be, I don't know, in nursing homes or doing something else. But in 10 years from now, there will be a better system in place.
Well, I will have an absentee ballot in that nursing home. I'll tell you that, regardless of what the Racine County Sheriff says.
And just don't do it in Racine, right?
Yeah.
Don't be in
But,
Racine.
you know, I hope you're right, Jake. So, I tell you, we have 8 members of the House of Representatives in Wisconsin, and only one of those districts is competitive.
Yep.
I mean, to me, that is the definition of a disgrace. How can you have one competitive United States House of Representative district? I think that's the first district, right? The one with
it's the
Ron-
third.
the third district, the Ron Kine district.
And by the way, the Republicans just changed that map. Their new map makes that safe for the Republican who's running. It takes out the Democratic, whatever votes there were that made that competitive. And so that is now a safe Republican seat.
Well,
So
I hope you're right, Jay. I hope we do have this Act 10 style large scale movement that tries to change this, because, I'm tired of seeing these numbers that one party gets more than 50% of the vote statewide, but ends up with 38% of the seats. Right? Something is wrong. Something is clearly wrong.
Well, Tony, let me just add this if I can, and this is probably very controversial, and you two may disagree with this. But I think what's going to happen soon at the United States Supreme Court level with regard to women's rights and a woman's ability to be able to determine the health for their own body is going to create a firestorm in this country that will lead to the kind of movement I'm talking about. And what I'm talking about then would be a movement of people to reclaim control over their lives, whether it's their health care or it's their political system. And so I think that kind of combination will be a powerful, irresistible force that I think we're going to see happen within the next 5-6 years and result in a better place for this country.
I almost think it needs to happen for what happens next. There has to be something big, and it's probably not going to be a good thing. In this case, I know it's not going to be a good thing, because you see what's going on in Mississippi with the Supreme Court, and Roe versus Wade is now on the table. So, but it's going to take something like that. I agree. I do agree.
Yeah, I agree. I think enough people are starting to tune in that like a couple of corporate senators from Arizona and West Virginia can somehow be the 2 most powerful people in the country that can stop progress on scores of issues.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. At some point, enough people have to wake up and say, hey, look, that's not the way the system is supposed to work.
Well, we need to get rid of the filibuster. Obviously,
Yeah.
Such an arcane instrument of a few of the majority of the minority to be able to block the will of the majority. And we need to also have federal legislation in place that does things like prevents gerrymandering and
Yep.
prevents voter suppression and has automatic voter registration, so that when you register your car or you register to get a driver's license, you're automatically
Yeah.
put on voting rolls.
Yeah.
They're common sense things that almost every other Western democracy has. I mean, we're the laggards as we are in so many other areas.
Well, as you said earlier, right? I mean, as long as you've got people in power that want to determine who their voters are, right, rather than have the voters determine who sits in power, that's a huge problem. Jay, we're just about out of time, so thank you once again so much for doing this. We want to obviously this be a regular feature, because no one knows what the heck is going on. Quite like Jay Heck.
or least of all Jay Heck, but right. No, it's always a pleasure. I appreciate it. And, the one thing we can say is that, in the next weeks, months ahead, it could be bad, but it's not going to be dull. And you have to keep fighting. So, just never give in. That's my slogan. And never let them see you cry.
Yes.
No.
All right. Thanks so much, Jay.
Thanks so much, Jay.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Matt, another really great show. I think that Jay Heck is so spot on
Yeah.
on so much of what's going on in Wisconsin as regards elections and reform of elections.
Well, it's hard to keep this to about 30 minutes with with
Yeah.
Jay in there too. I mean, we could talk for hours. Maybe we should do maybe we should do one of these and have it where, we'll have like a part 1, part 2, or part 3 or something. Just
Yeah.
like let the time go and see where the conversation goes.
Well, what's so frustrating is 99% of the people, when they listen to someone like Jay,
Mhm.
they'll say, oh yeah, he's just talking common sense.
Yep.
We ought to have nonpartisan district maps. So if 99% of the people agree with something and we don't have it, that raises the question, why?
Right. Yeah.
That's the thing. And it's because our government, and this is not a new phenomenon, it didn't start in 2021,
No.
but our government has been co-opted
Yeah.
by what I'll call anti-democratic, and I don't mean anti-democratic party, anti-small democratic forces. And until we find a way to get over that, I mean, Jay said we need a kind of movement. I agree with him. Until we find a way to get back to small d democracy, we're going to forever be having these kind of shows, and it's depressing.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I think something like what he's suggesting is going to happen, and it's not going to be good. But we're going to see if we can, get some silver linings out of it,
Yeah.
and kind of see where it goes. But I mean, maybe that's what it's going to take to be the kick in the ass that people need to
Yeah.
actually get out and mobilize and do something about it.
Yeah. I mean, wouldn't you think, Matt, that any candidate for office who believes it should be more difficult to vote rather than as easy as possible, wouldn't you think that kind of position is disqualifying?
I would think so.
Yeah, you would think so, right? And yet our legislature is filled with people who have no interest in making voting as easy as possible.
It makes no sense to me. at all.
No. And yet we keep returning them to office in part because of the nature of the districts.
Yeah.
Right. So in so many of these districts, if the incumbent is against small d democracy, you can't even primary the person.
No.
The district won't allow for a victory. So that we got to get over that, man.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of changes that have to be made, and hopefully, with all of our running on empty shows, that we're chipping away at that little by little. Maybe
Little by little, takes
Yeah.
time. We're
So-
getting there.
getting there. So, all right. Well, until next time, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Got some links down below that you can check out. And as always, stay elevated.
And always stay elevated.
You're running on empty with Matt and Tony.
Stay elevated.
Always stay excuse me. Stay elevated.
All right, we'll do that again.
Thank you.